hello to the cameras?
I said hello. Right? Hello? Oh, yes. Good.
So I just saw that many of you here have already seen Aquariuss, and anybody who was in the screening last night at Alice Tully Hall, which was the US premiere, saw in the Q&A afterwards that there were people on the side of the audience silently holding up protest signs. And I see we actually have some protest signs here tonight. And I'm sure both of you are very used to this already, because at the premiere in Cannes in May, you participated in a red carpet demonstration to protest the new government in Brazil. And I'm wondering how you feel about being the center of so much political attention. It seems to be ongoing, and it's following you around at every screening you go to.
Yes, the film seems to have touched a nerve in Brazilian society. And we did a protest in Cannes at a very dramatic moment in Brazilian politics. In fact, it seems to get more and more dramatic every week. And at the time we went up the steps at the Palais, the Ministry of Justice had been slashed, had been extinguished. This impeachment process had begun. And we did this very quiet little protest, which became something big. And every time we screened the film, not only in Brazil, but in other cities, it happened in Brussels, in Paris, in Sydney, and Munich. It happened last night, here in New York, of course. I think the film, especially in Brazil, of course, it seems to have captured a certain mood, a certain atmosphere in the country. And of course, it is not a political film in the sense that it takes place in Congress or in the Senate or in some government building, but it's a political film because it's about somebody who says no at a certain point. And this, I think, in today's society, sometimes when you say no, it becomes a political act. And it's been fantastic in Brazil. I mean, we're still in a lot of screens. We've done 350,000 tickets, which is amazing for a film this size. And we've had a lot of very passionate reactions to the film, packed screenings with people screaming at the end. The film does have a kind of a cathartic element to it, especially reaching at the end, the final sequence. And it happened again at the Alice Tully Hall last night. And when you go back, looking at the history of film, you can see that some films, they seem to have captured a certain mood, and it seems to have happened with Aquariuss, to my surprise. But it's been a very passionate and very complex and complicated year in Brazilian society, so maybe it comes with the package.
Do you feel like people are engaging with the issues raised in the film, or is the polarized political climate still dominating the discussion around the film? Because people were arguing about it for months before they had even seen the film. And now that it's been released and it's popular, do you feel like people are actually discussing in a more nuanced way the critique raised in the film?
We've had major articles coming out basically every 2 days in Brazil. The latest one came out on Sunday, yesterday, at Folha de São Paulo. Very interesting piece. Yes, the film was being discussed for 3 months before anybody saw it in Brazil. And after it opened, the discussion grew bigger, of course, because people began to see the film. And there has been a lot of for and against, and mostly based on the political views of those writing about the film. But of course it's very healthy, because ultimately it's a democracy and people should discuss a work of art, and that's what's been happening to Aquariuss, and it's been amazing. As a filmmaker, I think it's an amazing thing, especially when things are, based on ideas. Of course, some of those pieces, they leave the field of ideas and they begin to sound a little off the track in terms of the ideas which are really absent. It's very much like we say in Brazil, it's a discussion about football. And my team is better than yours, but I don't know, maybe that's part of the game also.
I imagine some people watch the film because they're Sônia Braga fans and they may not even be aware of the political controversy surrounding the film. And Sônia, I'm curious what it's like for you as such a known celebrity, the reactions that you hear from people to this role and to the film and to your involvement.
Yeah, it's boa noite para quem fala português. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. Well, it's very interesting because many people come to talk to me saying this phrase, it's amazing because there is no such a woman in the movies. And the first time that I heard that and I understood that was, yes, but this person, this woman is in life. She's just not in the film, so that's not fair. And listen to you talking now and the situation in Brazil, it seems to me also that what it is in the film also is not being talking about in arts, in films, about politics. So when this film came and people start watching the film, maybe because of myself, but also and a lot because they like Kleber and his movies from the Kleber's big fans from his short films and everything. So I think it was a combination of this chemistry between myself and Kleber. But also I think that this film brought to people this thing that it is out there, but really is not in the movies. People are not talking about this kind of actions that citizens should take when they know they have the right. Like if you know you have the right to sue somebody, you should go ahead and do it, or if you don't agree with something. And what's wrong in Brazil is that it should be a dialogue and not like a country divided as it is in black and white. So I believe, and I want to believe that this movie brought a little bit to people that may be unaware went to see the movie because of me and went out home saying, oh, that's a great thing. So it's about something that we have to say no when we don't like about it. So I think brought back the colors of discussions and the dialogue that should be there before even, And I feel very pleased that I did this movie. And today I got my cousin sent me an email, and I printed and I folded and gave as a gift to Kleber. That is a young man. He's 28 years old, and he wrote to my cousin to send the email to me saying, "How come I didn't know you? What's happened? I'm amazed. I went to see Aquarius and I'm in shock. Where were you?" So it's a good question. When you have 200 million people in a country, one network television, sometimes can get difficult to be around, I guess.
You both said that the film isn't explicitly political, but Clara, the character, makes a political act in saying no and exercising her right as a citizen to sue or to fight for what she believes in. She's an aging woman who demands respect and who disagrees with what her place in society is. And you also have some class hierarchy that is shown in the film. That Clara is more affluent and she has a housekeeper who, there's definitely a social hierarchy there. So I feel that there's some social critiques that you're interested in exploring in the film, but it's nuanced and it's not overtly political. So how did you approach that when you were writing the film and making the film? And was there anything that you thought, no, this is too much, this is too obvious, or nobody would believe this, even if it is based on, you know, real instances that you found in your research or your writing?
I was just very honest with what living in Brazil and being Brazilian and belonging to the class I belong to means. Brazil, of course, I mean, any society is complex and full of contradictions, and sometimes I feel that in films or even books, novels, the nuances and the complexities are missing. For instance, in Brazilian film, if we go back to the 60s, there was this desire to portray the lower classes and the favelas and the people living in the sertão and hunger, and often, or most of the times, the filmmakers, they did not have personal training in those themes. That might have brought us some amazing films, and in many other cases, some films which feel phony. And this has become more or less the norm in Brazilian film production. When I was a young film critic, I seemed to focus a lot on identifying those problems, and of course sometimes when you're a young film critic, you were going to fight for the films that you would like to see being made, and you criticize the ones that for some reason you decided that should be criticized. And then I set out to make my own films, and they bring sounds and Aquarius, that they bring this point of view which is, in a way, it's ambivalent, but at the same time it's full of tension and conflict, because living in society is full of tension and conflict. Lately, I should point out, after the initial impact of finding out what Aquarius was and what Clara was in Brazil, people began to ask themselves, but wait, she's bourgeois, and she, at the same time, she's fighting this company. She has a housemaid, but at the same time, the guy from the company points out that she has darker skin. She has a nightmare with a black woman whom she accuses of, I'm spoiling the film for those who haven't seen it. She has a nightmare with a woman from her past, from the past of her family, and this woman is black. So all of these elements that belong to the characterization of Clara, they began to emerge, sometimes as extremely negative and sometimes as seen as very positive aspects of how she was built. So she's supposed to be this the weak part of the conflict, but at the same time she uses her power, her class, which comes from class, to fight back and get what she wants. So, yeah, so in answer to your question, I just try to be as honest as possible, and sometimes that means being a little hard on the country I come from, and it's like I said back in Brasilia at the Brazilian Film Festival, where I did a masterclass, and some of these racial issues came up, and my answer was, no film of mine will ever try to fix Brazil. You know, that's my main reaction to that.
Clara is such a rich character. She has so much history and so many layers. And you said that when you were casting the role, you realized that you needed a professional actress who's accomplished, like Sônia Braga.
The best and the biggest.
Yeah,
yes.
to be able to pull it off.
And he got me.
You pull it off beautifully. So it's such a challenging role, and I think, Sônia, you're in almost all of the movie, at least those scenes that take place in present day. What do you both think is so challenging about the role of Clara, and how did you discuss bringing her to life behind the scenes? How did you approach her as a character?
We're doing the same thing.
Both nodding your heads.
We're doing like. Well, because when I saw the film and I go, wow, and because first of all, what happened was a mission, a rescue mission that Kleber did. That's why I gave this letter to him today, and in the letter I say thanks for the rescue. When he invited me to be in his movie, speaking in Portuguese, right? So that's where everything started. And he sent the screenplay, and I started reading it. And I was reading as an actress that I was being all my life for 50 years. I cannot believe it. And I started reading it, and it's just there was a dialogue between me and this character. We knew each other, I knew her, and it was like even as if Kleber was spying on me or something. And I had this, yeah, you were. And I had this feeling that we were talking the other day that, when I start reading, it was almost like this is science fiction thing that I came out and I met Clara in another dimension, and we were talking and make agreements how we're going to do this, And we came back and say, okay, Kleber, we're ready to do it. Roll the cameras. Because there was no, from myself, there was no, maybe not even one question about, or, how is she, why is she doing this? Everything was like so right, one scene to another, leading to another that was right, that the other one that was perfect, and the relationship that she had, and to everybody. And the thing that Kleber described to me, and the other day here in the conversation, you were talking again, and I remember so vividly, that you were saying the point of view of the camera, the movie was that camera, that the point of view, it was very important to you, and that maybe that's why, becomes so strong, because it's a movie. It's so cinema, it's so like, and I was the witness of that. I don't understand when actors they don't want to be in a movie set, because we are witness of movie making. It's like to be the witness of a painting or something that's going to be on a screening. So we're laying down there, and those cranes are flying over yourself, and then these people are, looking at you and retouching you and everything. Then we're making a movie. It's so exciting, it's so important, so good, and especially in this one, that everyone, I say we, I don't say they, because we were, all of us, collaborators in the way of we are doing the same thing. We're doing a movie, we're doing this movie, and this is Aquarius, I think. And that Clara is that she is probably the answer or the question from all of us all together. We want that woman to be that Clara, that everybody. Now, some people write to me saying they want to meet Clara. Yeah. So that's going to be hard. They want to have a tea, but with her. And so do I.
Interesting thing you said, Michael, about her being in the present day scenes in the film. But when we shot the 1980 segment in the film, it was a month after we had begun to shoot the film. So the 1980 segment, where Clara is played by Barbara Colin, she was already poisoned in a way by Sônia in the film, and everybody was kind of touched by what Sônia had been doing for a month in the film. So even if she's not in that segment, there is something of Sônia in that segment. And about the role being demanding, I really, when I write a script, I try to, I think in terms of dynamics, almost like a couple of songs from pop music. They come up in my mind every now and then. You know, something like A Day in the Life or Bohemian Rhapsody or maybe Alegria Alegria by Caetano. They're very the way they evolve and the way they go up and down, and I think a good script or a good book, it should go all the way up and all the way down, and it should never be flat all the time. And I think that's how I see Clara's role in the film. You know, she gets emotional, she gets angry, she is lonely, she's surrounded by people, she's violent, she has sex, and all of that combined together, I think you get a very demanding role. And I had this ridiculous idea. She smokes a good joint, yeah. And I had this bad idea that I would find an unknown actress on the street, in the supermarket. And then, of course, I realized that was stupid.
You'd still be looking.
I would still be waiting, yeah.
Sônia, you touched on this already a bit, but you've been living and working in the U.S. for quite a while, and you came to Recife to shoot this film, working with a group of people who live and work in Recife, and you're kind of like an outsider coming to a group of strangers. You had to very quickly build up an intimate trust with them to be able to do your performance. So can you talk, both of you, about how you worked on set and what the filming process was like?
Well, first I met Kleber by Skype, and so we're talking. It was the first talk after I read the screenplay. So, and then he said one day to me, very worried.
The first time we talked, I had dengue fever, so you thought I was a very kind of sickly director.
That's true. He was like almost like dying. Don't die on me now. You found me, please. Get soup, rest, a lot of water, please. Let's talk about the film. So it's true. You had dengue, right? Oh my God. And he survived, and it got even better. So one day, Kleber says, Sônia, I need to talk to you about something. And I say, okay. And he says, oh, here's the thing. Sometimes you need to know that I like to work with people, they're not actors. And I go, fantastic! I love it, because I'm not an actor either. And he says, you know what? And I say, yeah, because I'm afraid of actors. And I was. I have to say that Kleber fixed that. I'm afraid of rehearsals. I was afraid of reading. And because I had this fear of going to a rehearsal with academic actors, where they are so prepared and they know so much, and I go there knowing nothing. I want people to tell me what to do, you know. So when he told me that, I say, wow, this is going to be fun. This is going to be nice, to be with people that they probably even know more than I do, because they're from Recife, you know. We're going to work together, and this is going to be fantastic. So then Kleber came here, we talked for 2 days, right? You were feeling better, it was very hot, and you were very sweat. And then he go home, and when I got there, I was ready to go. So we went to rehearsals. What he told me was gonna be, relax, Sônia, it's gonna be okay. And it really was. It was like so easy, you know, and nobody questioned that I was there, and You know, I met the people that I was working with. I never asked them, are you an actor or not? They were the characters. They were like to play the characters. And there was such respect from everybody to everybody, you know. So as I said before, really, I have to say this, I was so happy, first of all, that I was doing a movie, my mother tongue, that I wasn't using it for a long time. So that was very important to me, because the last movie, as in the movies that I did, was Tieta, right, Kleber?
Carlos Diegues.
He knows more my life than me. He tracks that. So to me, to have that gift, to be rescued to the Brazilian movies, and when we're making a movie, of course, we want this movie to be the best things of our lives, because it's a hard work, it costs a lot, you know, and it's like 6 days a week. We work, 1 day off. I never had a day off. I never had a break for lunch. I would just doing rehearsals, work, break. I was learning piano, and work, sleep, wake up, go back to rehearsal. And I said to them, look, I cannot be sick. So my day break, I would go to acupuncturist, so I could get good energy to be ready for. And that was my life for all these months. So the 7 weeks, right? So when we got there, we were, I don't think we had time for this, you know, this little thing, like, oh, you're coming. No, we're ready to jump and work. Everybody was so excited. That's what I remember, you know, and Emily is here. Emily, our producer. There she
Executive
is.
producer.
Emily did something that was so fantastic for me. It's something that I never had in my life, and I never needed. And she got somebody to work with me 24 hours a day, Karina Nobre, and it was my angel, I called her. You know, she was really my angel. So she would make me like go every day and come back every day. She would pick me up, she'd drop me home, and she was my angel. So, you know, that's the way it was. And next that we know, the movie ended, and we're at the beach, right? And that's the rep party. Sadly, actually, was the rep party. Almost correct.
I have one last question, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. I wanted to talk a little bit about genre, because Clara is kind of like a classic heroine, and Diego is an old-fashioned villain, or you could see it that way. And Clara also is very, she's in the present and the past, often at the same times, so there's kind of an element of time travel, if you want to get creative. So were you consciously playing with any genre conventions when you made the movie, or when you were writing the script?
I'm still not sure if it's too conscious. I really believe it comes from my own, whatever style it is that I have, it just comes out naturally. It happened in Neighboring Sounds, which is not a genre piece, but it feels like a thriller. At least, you know, people seem to agree on that. And the same thing again with Aquariuss. In fact, the early synopsis I sent out was, it said that Clara is a 65-year-old retired journalist who has the ability to travel in time. And I actually don't think it's so far off what the film actually is. But that synopsis was actually designed to not divulge the actual plot, because we needed, we didn't want the construction companies after us before we even made the film. I just said it. I can't believe I said that here. But it's
We
true.
don't have to keep the secret anymore?
No, because
Okay.
the film is done, and I don't have any other projects with construction companies. But I also thought that, you know, after I began to show the script to some friends and they reacted, I already felt it reading the script, but they came back saying that it felt very much like a siege movie, you know, almost like, of course, you have the Clara's apartment, flat, and it's very well established in the film with different kinds of shots, and that space is well defined in the film, and that's and it's always a situation of security has been compromised or might be compromised in terms of her safety. People trying to come in, which is a very classic situation, which seems to come back in some of my other films also, even going back to the short films. So there are some genre elements, I think, and some people have reported feeling very anxious watching the film, which I think is a good reaction. But ultimately, it's not a horror film. It probably feels a little bit like one every now and then, but it's mostly a straight drama, I think. But I think the elements are there.
Okay, so we'll take some questions from the audience. We have a microphone going around, so if you could just wait for me to call on you. Can we have a microphone right here?
I just want to start by saying thank you, Michael. You've done such amazing digital stuff for all of us who are not present, can see so much that happens at the New York Film Festival, and that you bring Sônia and this wonderful director that will be able to go much further than this room. My question has to do with novella, and some of the elements of the story seem to bring in that aspect of popular culture as the novella, and also 30s and 40s movies that had very strong women that were socially conscious and engaged but were popular culture movies. Does any of that make sense to you in terms of Aquariuss?
I never even considered writing a male character for this film. I always thought that she would be a woman, a strong woman. I think dramatically, a woman faces more obstacles in society because societies are normally chauvinistic. Brazil, of course, is one of them. I really understood that when I was writing or reading the sequence where the men from the construction company knock on her door. And it would not be the same scene if a 5'10", 65, 70-year-old man got up and answered the door. I think it's stronger when it's a woman and she opens the door and she sees three men. There is something more dramatic in that, in the way they talk to her and the way they try to make her do something. So she would always be a woman. When you mentioned the films of the 30s and 40s, yes, I still don't understand why is it that we don't see so many films with strong women, even, especially women after 40. I don't know why. For me, I never really thought about that, but it seems to come up a lot after the film has come out. And the most beautiful thing that I've been getting for this film everywhere, not only in Brazil, is very young women reacting to Clara as a possibility for the future, and that's a beautiful thing.
Not seeing possibility for me?
She is you.
And the novella aspect, that sort of the sexy part, the kinds of things which serious movies, seriously political movies don't normally have in them, and is in your film, so that it opens the door for a much wider audience, in a sense?
I actually believe that this film is more more open than, for example, Neighboring Sounds. People I mean, Neighboring Sounds was a very successful film, but it seemed to leave some people scratching their heads. This one is more straightforward. I really like one thing that I did discuss with a lot of my friends before making the film, even during the making of the film, was this idea of contemporary cinema or contemporary world cinema. For some reason, it has become fashionable for films to hold shots for sometimes extreme amounts of time in fixed shots, and it's almost like people sent out a memo to characters saying don't say a word, and then I go back to the American films of the 70s, which in my mind are some of the best films ever made, or at least to my taste, where people talk, and then there's a cut, and then the other person is answering, and then there's another cut, and the other person is asking a question, and so forth. And films are fast, and films just feel natural without any fashion concerns. And that's what I did, basically. Sometimes it's very talky, Aquarius, and sometimes it shuts the hell up, and there's a 5-6 minute sequence where Sônia is going about doing her things at the flat, the apartment, and I like the idea that it's a popular film, and if it resembles aspects from pop culture, could be television or films from the past, I'm all right with that. I'm fascinated by the way that culture feeds on film itself, or film feeds on the culture, on the history of culture itself.
Okay, can we get a question or a microphone in the third row? Right? Yeah.
Yes, I want to ask Kleber, elaborate a little bit more about shoot a film in Recife, because for me this was one of the great contributions of the last government that shift the attention from the rural Pernambuco or Northeast for the new themes and new, I think it's so new. For example, have literature, cinema. What is going on in Recife and why? I think I am very curious about this.
A very tough question to answer. It's really about a very strong film scene. I think 4 or 5, maybe 6 months ago, you had here another film a very strong film from Recife, Neon Boy Neon by Gabriel Mascaro. I think he was here. Yeah. And over the last 15, 17 years, the film production in Recife really took center stage in Brazilian film. Not in Brazilian commercial cinema, but in Brazilian, let's say, more personal films coming out of Brazil. I think the whole digital revolution had a lot to do with this, but also, of course, there is something, culturally speaking, very strong in Pernambuco state, in Recife. Of course, over the last 100 years, really, we've had very strong literature. We had a fantastic silent film movement in the 20s, the Ciclo do Recife, which is also very hard to explain why it would happen in Recife in the 20s, but it did. And 2 of those films are classics, are really, really good films. Aitaré da Praia and A Filha do Advogado, wonderful silent films. We had a very interesting Super 8 movement in the 70s, and then production picked up again in the 90s with short films, and today there is a lot of funding, local funding, which when you mix local funding with federal funding, you can actually make films which are not mega productions. They're kind of I think, intelligently well scaled. Aquarius costs $1 million, or just under $1 million.
For American audience.
I'm sorry?
I think it would be very interesting to explain to American audience what means being Recife compared with São Paulo and Rio that used to be the center of everything.
Well, in a way, it still is. Economically speaking, that's where the money is. But of course, when you're away from the big financial center, you have more freedom to do things because nothing is really expected from you. And I think that's what happens culturally and artistically in a place like Recife, which is 1,300 miles from Rio or São Paulo. That's basically the. But there is one very interesting explanation which I actually like. The local culture for 300 years was based on monoculture, which was sugarcane. There's a little bit of that in neighboring sounds. Sugarcane was the only thing that ever came out of Recife in terms of a product, of Pernambuco as a product. And I think that generated almost like an antidote to the idea of mono. So people would be multi. So they would really go against the idea of being mono, and that would probably explain. And of course, Dutch presence. I don't know. It's a very interesting mix of different elements. I'm just blabbing here, but I'm not. It's very complex to explain the whole Pernambuco thing with culture, but it's a very strong area in Brazil, and I think the distance from Rio and São Paulo probably explains why we do some of the things we do.
I think, like being from the other, not even more from the other cities, but the other country, going to straight from here to Recife, what I observed too, the collaborators of Aquariuss, that they make other movies together. The crew from Aquariuss did the other film. It was even in Cannes with us, a short film. And then I was observing that they are really committed with the city, with what's happening socially, economically, politically, and they are all very, very committed and involved in these aspects of the life as citizens than artists altogether. So I think that makes it really a great effect and in their works as artists. And I believe from an observer that that is what happens a little bit different from the other centers, São Paulo and Rio. They do the gig and they go home. You know, like jazz musicians, they're passionate about the music, so they play the music, but they do weddings, right? And they go. I know a friend of mine taught me that, Mark. He goes, well, a gig is a gig. So that's why they make the bread, So I felt like being in Recife, that people are so passionate about the city, the life of the city, the politics, the economics, and the art. They talk about it. I haven't seen that since maybe when I was growing up in São Paulo in the 70s, the 60s, and that was amazing to me. And the other day, that was the movement for the Senior Linda that they took over a movie. Maybe you
Occupy Senior Linda.
Occupy Senior Linda. So maybe you want to talk about this a little. So that demonstrated a little bit how the city is not just the filmmakers and the art, but there was the audience that moves together with it.
Yeah, there's this classic movie palace in Olinda, which has been closed for over 40, almost 50 years. And it's always supposed to open sometime, and it never opens. So last week, the cultural people who work with us, basically, and friends, they took over the cinema, and they did a special screening of Aquariuss on Saturday night, which was beautiful. We were in New York. I couldn't attend, but we got the pictures, and it was a very special moment because now it seems that something is going to happen at last with that place.
In other words, they play jazz, right?
They play jazz. Yeah. I'd just like to point out that the cinema from Pernambuco has been getting a lot of attention, but it's very important to say that I think, in my mind, the Brazilian cinema is going through a very fertile and interesting moment right now. So there are good films coming from other cities.
So we just have time for one more question. We'll go right here.
Okay, so I wanted to say that one of the things I like the most about the movie is that the characters, they're not like politicians or important people. They're all very simple, but they're at the same time very powerful, and they represent the whole society and the whole culture in Brazil. I loved all the characters, but I want to talk about especially Diego, because I found him so fascinating, because I feel like I know a lot of Diegos in my life in Brazil.
Me too.
And he's the villain, but he's the Brazilian kind of villain. He doesn't know that he's a villain. He thinks he's the good guy. And
that's funny.
Yeah. And I love the scene when Clara she's telling him about the party, and he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know." He's not like, yeah, he's not mean, you know. He's polite, and he's, "Oh, sorry, that was my bad. I didn't mean. I will talk to them." He's like, he really plays the good guy role, but he's not. And I think this is basically how our politicians and all the. I mean, this is our culture. Like, the bad guys in Brazil are not, they think they're the good guys. And I wanted to, because
not all of them.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. But I guess the ones that, I mean, the politicians, I'm talking about the politicians, basically, because this movie is very, it talks a lot about politics, but not in a direct way, as you said. So I wanted to know if you think he represents the politics in any way, the politics.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to Gregorio before we came in. There seems to be a collapse of representation of, for example, the villain. Not only in Brazil, I think in the world today. For instance, if we went back to the 80s and I saw some sci-fi, dystopian, apocalyptic science fiction film, forgive me for what I'm about to say, somebody like Donald Trump would be the president of the United States. And today he's really running, and he's almost there. I actually believe that he will not be elected. Forgive me for anybody who's going to vote for Mr. Trump here. But when we deal with villains and the representation of certain archetypes in film, for example, a lot of the news that's coming out in Brazil now, it really reads like a Monty Python sketch. In terms of the absurdity of the decisions, in terms of the absurdity of how politicians, of what politicians say. The newly elected mayor of São Paulo, Doria, he said on Saturday in the newspaper that he hopes one day most Brazilians will be able to wear Ralph Lauren as a means of equality. So, you know, it's becoming very tough to write fiction, not only in Brazil. So I try to make Diego as plausible as humanly possible, because I know some Diegos. And in his case, I totally agree with you. He hasn't been told that he's a villain, but he actually is. But I have to disagree with you, and some politicians actually walk and talk like villains.
Unfortunately, we have to end our discussion. Please join me in thanking Kleber.
Thank you very much.